All right, Tucker, you run about a 10-yard button hook down the right side. Patrick, you're wide on the left. Just run a fly pattern and get behind Dankowski. Greg, I want you to block Ray Hardman. Just knock him on his ass and step over the line. I'll go short to you if nobody's open. Hike it on 3, okay?
I don't know. I'm increasingly uncomfortable with football culture.
I know, right? The concussions and the way they're covered up.
And the locker room bullies who tormented Jonathan Martin at the Dolphins. You can't tell me that doesn't connect to the Ray Rice story.
Hey, you guys, this is a touch football game, not some kind of freshman ethics seminar. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I've completed my last 4 passes. Can we just blow these guys up, please?
See, there's that language again. Blow somebody up.
Remember the whole George Carlin monologue linking the language of football to the language of war?
On the other hand, football at its best reaches back to the Greek notion of arete, which in the Iliad seems to combine strength and courage with the development of mind.
You cannot be serious. Plato and Homer would never recognize that concept in today's NFL.
It's more like the samurai notion of Bushido, with its emphasis on honor unto death.
Okay, can it? You pathetic library pace sniffing freaks. You really make me want to puke. Stow the NPR wussy talk and get up on the line and run the play like I told you.
Again, so hierarchical. In the Iliad, excellence is contextually understood to include cooperation, such as
here, have a nice big cooperative glass of shut-up juice. This game, which has made America great, is being eaten away by moral reflection, and that really hurts. No texting in the huddle, Greg. Today on the show, 3 writers explore the modern moral quandary of football. And now he says he just changed his pads, and he doesn't seem to be talking about football. Colin McEnroe.
That's really just sort of what life is, you know? You just wear different kinds of pads as you age. And, they have to be changed. All right, so it's like Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man, but experienced exclusively in terms of pads. All right, so, just to sort of set the stage here, and I confess my own prejudices as well, which is, well, actually, even before that, let me just say that it's now decades since this happened, but one of the most famous football collisions ever was the breaking of Joe Theismann's leg. He was a quarterback, Lawrence Taylor, and another member of the Giants kind of converged on him and broke his leg. And I remember that for days and days and days on national broadcasts and on local sports, they would just show this clip over and over again, and then they go, that is horrible. That is the most horrible thing I've ever seen. Let's see it again in slow motion. All right, could we see it from that other angle? I mean, it was just showed constantly. And what I was thinking about today was that in 2004 at the Super Bowl, Janet Jackson's nipple was, visible for, I don't know, like a fraction of a second. That was this huge crisis in America. We really had to do something about that. And meanwhile, all of us are watching really, sort of incredible controlled and uncontrolled violence and mayhem on football. And I do not exclude myself. I am there every Sunday. I often gather with other fans of the Green Bay Packers. I'm frequently sitting next to the most lovely 80-something lady, the most gentle, sweet 80-something lady that I know. Her name is Terry. I adore her. She's a gentle, sweet soul, but she really does. She really does want to see the Packers win and whatever that takes, and so that's kind of who we are, where a lot of us are. It is the Brokeback Mountain thing. We can't quit this love we have for football. So we're going to talk about that today. We've got great guests. We got the guests we wanted. Mark Edmondson is with us by a studio-to-studio connection. He's a professor of English at the University of Virginia and the author of Why Teach and Why Football Matters, My Education in the Game. Also with us, Will Leach. He's a senior writer for Sports on Earth. He's like David Edelstein. He's like just on multi-platforms. Senior writer for Sports on Earth, hosts the daily podcast, The Will Leach Experience, contributing editor for New York Magazine, and the author of 4 books, including Are We Winning? Fathers and Sons, and the Golden Age of Baseball. And the guy who kind of got all this rolling for me a little bit, Steve Allman. We've had other conversations with him as his thinking is being developed here. He's a reporter and the author of several award-winning books, including Candy Freak, which occasioned one of his other appearances on the show, and Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. What we're going to do, I think, here in the first segment is talk a little bit about why we can't quit football, why we get so addicted might be the wrong word, but it might be the right word. What it is we love so much about the game. Then in the second segment, we'll talk about what it is that troubles us so much about the game. And then in the third segment, in the great tradition of public radio, we'll look for constructive steps that we can take. Or we won't. Maybe we won't do that. Anyway, as we go along here, you're free to tweet us at WNPR Colin. And you can call 860-275-7266, although I currently have both phone lines tied up. So, Mark Edmondson, I'm going to start with you, because if we're going to spend the first segment here talking about the love of the game, so your book is called Why Football Matters, My Education in the Game. It is mostly concerned with your own high school experience, where you feel as though football transformed you from, in your own words, a buttery young man, young man of buttery physique and perhaps middling at best academic and athletic ambitions into something else. But I'm stealing your words away from you. Explain to me why you love the game enough to write a book called Why Football Matters.
Well, buttery will do it okay, or donut-bellied was another one of my lines about it. And I was kind of lost and kind of going nowhere, and my family was at sea, and I'm not going to say it changed my life and made me into another being, because the being I became was pretty strongly related to the one I was, but gave me some confidence, gave me some guts, gave me some loyalty, gave me the capacity to jump back up after I'd been smacked to the ground one time after another. And I liked it. I got a lot from it, and I think that what I got from it stays with me to this day in one form or another. So I got to say I'm grateful to the game.
We'll kind of go around the horn of it. That's a different sport. Will Leach, I know one of the things just from reading your work, you do feel as though football, for all of its moral compromises, for all of the things that are in the news these days, has something left to offer us. Tell us what that is.
Well, I think one of the reasons that football has become under such fire in the last few years is the popularity of football has exploded over the last few years. And a lot of that's because of all of our major sports. It's the easiest for the casual fan to follow. It looks perfect on television. It fits in this very ideal formatting for television. You can watch a full 3-hour game and get very excited about everything that's happening, even though you really can't actually explain a single thing that's happening or maybe be able to name a play. And I think it's something that so kind of fits into the way that we consume things now, that you can know football, you can feel like you know football and follow football closely, have a fantasy football team or gamble on football and do all of these things while still just kind of remaining casually connected to it, which I think is one of the reasons that it's exploded so much, and also, frankly, one of the reasons I think it's come under an extra amount of scrutiny in recent years. So I like football. I would like to make a better case for it than that, but certainly I do think that that's one of the major reasons that all this has happened in the last few years, is just because it is so easy for even the most casual fan to follow, which I think has its benefits. There's a uniting aspect of sports in that.
So, Steve Almond, and we'll come back to that. And I do want to talk about some of its uniting aspects and also some of the other cases that can be made for football. So, Steve Almond, you're in the position, of course, having released a book called Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. And you really do depict yourself, I think, as rather than a repulsed fan, a kind of heartbroken fan, right? I mean, there's still something in you that loves this game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, football, I think, it's got this irresistible duality. It's mythical, it's visceral, it's liberating, it's lethal, it's eros, it's thanatos. It's just unbelievably, dramatically satisfying. And as Will said, the game is hugely popular, and there's a reason for that. It's not just that everybody's just dopey and savage. It's strategically an incredibly dense game. It's sort of the secret vice of the intellectual. And I find it is an addiction. I'll just go right there, and I'm like sober 8 months, but I'm still jonesing.
And so we have to talk about a little bit more about what it is we're jonesing for. And so Mark, I'm coming back to you. Your book is mostly about playing football in high school, but it's also about your son at the end, about him playing football. And I assume you also are a football fan, right? You watch football?
I am a watcher.
Yeah.
It seems that's such a hard question because, 120 million people watch the Super Bowl, and it's real hard to tell what's going on in each and every one of their heads. Some people, I'm guessing, that football is compensatory for. They spend a week eating some bad stuff at the office, and they come back on Sunday, and their team beats the other team, and they're full of joy. But I think other people, they admire what's amazing bravery and amazing skill, guts, on that field. And maybe a few of them say, you know, I could take that skill and guts, all that bravery, and transport it into my life in some way, however small. But I think there's just a huge span of football fans.
And Will, I mean, another part of this, you talked about how anybody can turn on the TV and the game is kind of made for television. It's made to be watched on television. It looks great on television. But also in this world, there are the group of deeper fans who really are enjoying, maybe in a fairly abstract and almost brainy way, a game that involves as much strategy, if not more, as any other sport. I mean, this is, for all of its brutality, a very cerebral pastime, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it is funny to think how the game can be almost equally enjoyed at the same level by someone who's just kind of barely paying attention and couldn't name a play, and people that can dive so deep. It is such an amazing game of strategy. One of my most interesting things about football is all these trends, particularly on the professional level. All these trends will come up, whether it's the Wildcats or whether it's the quick strike offense, or what we're seeing with Brian Kelly, with Chip Kelly in Philadelphia. All these trends come up. There are these highly strategic, like these men that come up with these things are almost nerdy. They're all, like they sit in a dark room for hours and hours and study and have frankly very unhealthy lives, eating Cheetos and trying to figure out this mystery of this game, and then someone will solve it and they'll figure it out, and you'll see what happened with Chip Kelly in Philadelphia, and we'll have some new thing that this is the way strategy is going now, and then everyone in football all gets together to try to stop it. And then there's another thing that comes the next year. It really is a fascinating way of watching, almost crowdsourcing in the acts of strategy, and the way someone will come up with one little twist and that twist will be knocked down, they'll come up with another one. It's the amount of brain power that goes into the game, the people involved in the game, is really kind of staggering. I wonder if we could win more global conflicts if we actually pointed it all in that direction sometime.
Although, well, you wonder about one of the things that I'm actually really intrigued by, and maybe we'll get into this more in the second segment, but you know, in Steve's book, towards the end, he quotes President Obama as saying if he had a son, he wouldn't let his son play football. And, you know, we're never going to be post-football, but obviously there are all these links between, as you say, military strategy and football, all these links in the language. I think these are pointed out in Mark's book, too, between the language of football and the language of war. Although you sort of think, you know, we're in a different military era, too. Maybe the kind of speech that President Obama gave last night is different from a speech that might have been given 15, 20 years ago when we had less complicated feelings about football. But we'll come to that. Steve Almond, one of the other things that you talk about is the sheer beauty of the game. And this is a hard thing to articulate to somebody who's not a football fan, who sees it as this group of kind of brute collisions, play after play after play. I'm with you on this, but talk about why you think the game, or you thought the game, is beautiful.
Yeah, I still think it's beautiful in the present tense. Let me say a quick thing about a connection that you drew implicitly there, Colin. You know, the idea of war at this point is not like it was during antiquity. It's very confusing and now very remote and abstract, and you know, the speech last night was about a conflict that is very amorphous and that has no moral clarity or coherence to it at all. And I think that really relates to what Will is talking about. Football has rushed in to fill the void. It is a form of simulated combat that, even though it's strategically dense, is perfectly apparent and reconnects us to these intuitive physical joys of childhood: leaping, running, throwing, tackling. And what Americans like, as a rule, is to see greatness. We like to see people who create miracles, whether those are intellectual miracles, ideological miracles, political or moral miracles, or physical miracles, most of all. And that's what you see when you see great football players. You see them creating a miracle with their body. Barry Sanders sees something that nobody else can possibly see, and his body can execute it. Nobody else sees the possibility in the midst of ruin that he sees. He makes the right cut at the right time, has the strength to break away from the strong safety, and he is in the open field running toward the end zone. Everybody, every fan is on some level jonesing for that experience where you somehow summon upon yourself in the midst of ruin and great danger this remarkable poise, grace, heroism, courage.
You sound with that statement so not like the guy who wrote a book called Against Football, but we will come to that. I think you do a good job of kind of laying out your own personal conflict and what you feel that you're giving up. Mark Edmondson, one part of this that we're not talking about that much, but one of the things that goes right to the heart of your book is the notion. I mean, it's been said very simplistically, football builds character. Well, that's almost kind of a cliche, kind of a hard thing to embrace now. But in your book, you really do talk about this as perhaps uniquely for you, a sport and a world, an environment that holds a person accountable for his behavior. Either you do this thing or you don't. Either you get the job done that you're supposed to get done or you don't. You're either committed to this or you're not. And if you're not, it's going to show up maybe more quickly than it would even in other athletic environments. But I'll pass that baton off to you.
Well, thanks. Character's tough to talk about, but I think that part of character is setting a goal that's reasonably laudable. And in the case of football, it's maybe getting better at your position and being able to sustain your team members through what you do. And then working toward that goal very slowly, taking the setbacks as they come, advancing gradually, assessing yourself in a critical way, then based on your assessment, doing what you need to do in order to improve. And that moves over in the direction of other activities that we take up in life. So that, I know it sounds counterintuitive on the face of it, but getting better at football and figuring out how to write a book, a difficult book, challenging book, they're not as different as it may initially seem. At the same time, I do a little talking about how the kind of character that football instills makes some guys seem almost automaton-like. It doesn't seem like they can think for themselves. It doesn't seem like they have any words or ideas that didn't come from the coach. And it strikes me that sometimes character can become too all-encompassing and too final. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but all things considered, character's worth developing.
So, Will Leitch, I mean, in a way, we really are talking about this schizoid division of American life, right? Many of us are. I have this experience on a regular basis. I really do gather. I'm not from Wisconsin, but I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. I gather with people to watch the Packers games. They are all from Wisconsin. They are consequently the nicest people you've ever seen in your life. They don't swear. They actually say at times when they're very disappointed about something that's happened on the field, they will actually say, "Gosh darn it." These are the nicest, sweetest people that I've ever met in my life. But we are really, most of the time, cheering violence and pain. We're cheering for something that is inflicting a tremendous amount of damage on the bodies of the people that we're watching. And I don't know, is there anything you can sort of say about that odd split? I mean, a lot of nice people watching something that's really, when you get right down to it, not all that nice.
Well, I say we might have had a different question there if you were an Oakland Raiders fan.
That's Allman. You can bring that up with him, yeah.
But yeah, of things. But I do think there is something to that, and I also think that's another reason that this is so much the NFL in particular, though really college football when it comes to how damaging this is to players. And the fact that they're not paid, actually, somewhat gets a pass in this kind of notion, or at least more of a one than the NFL does. But yeah, this is something as we've kind of learned more. Remember, there were 5 or 6 years ago, there was a segment on the ESPN highlight show called Jacked Up, which was all about the notion of, wow, the players that look to be the most frighteningly hurt. And it was a highlight show. It was like the good thing that happened at the end of the show. They got you excited. And I think we've got, while getting a little bit more aware of that, and I think understanding the kind of damage that this causes to people, I still don't think that's completely out of our system. You saw last week Dez Bryant, the wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys, went up for a pass and was just taken out from behind as if he were a rag doll. It was very violent. And I saw so many GIFs of that over and over and over all over the weekend. And so I think there's a certain kind of thing where we like to step back and we don't really consider, they're not real, they're all wearing helmets and you don't see their faces there's something almost superhuman about it that I think we're able to distance ourselves from that violence while still waiting for that violence when we watch the game. And I think you see that, if you're at a sports bar, even if you're at a sports bar, even if you're with someone that is, like most people are, very concerned about concussions, very concerned about player health, when there's a big hit everybody has a reaction, and it's not a reaction in a, oh, I hope he's okay, at least not initially. The initial reaction is, wow, what an amazing hit, and I think it's something that's kind of wrapped up in our appreciation of the game, whether we really like it or not.
And Steve Allman, you were an Oakland Raiders fan, and we talk about the aesthetics, the beauty of the game, and yeah, for me, watching Joe Montana complete a pass to Jerry Rice, I mean, that's a really beautiful thing. It's parabolically beautiful. It really is one of the nicest looking things in sports. But part of the aesthetic, as Will is saying, of football is that moment where a player, a receiver, maybe runs through the zone to the other side and gets his bell rung, gets really stood up with a really hard hit, and that, if the game is beautiful to people, that seems to be one of the things that's beautiful.
Yeah, well, Americans have always sought to regenerate our spirit through violence. That's just one of the sort of that's in the groundwater of American culture. But I want to try to connect something Mark was saying to what you're talking about now. I don't argue with people who played organized football or coached and found that it helped develop character. But I think the idea that football is the only way to overcome fear, develop discipline, is absurd and degrading. Because after all, very few young women play football, and that doesn't mean they have no hope of developing grit. I think kids face adversity all the time, in classrooms, at home, on the playground, and there's no doubt that sports can help them develop the strength of character, get back up. But so can a loving parent or a dedicated teacher or an inspiring pastor or a great book. The way I look at it is that our society would probably be better off if we found other, less overtly destructive ways to instill the virtues that Mark cites. And I would say that you cannot take violence out of football because it is inherently violent, and it's been like that since it was created. It started as a series of controlled riots, essentially a hazing activity, and all throughout its history it's been far more brutal. Back in 1904, 18 kids died, mostly college and prep school kids, and they almost banned the sport. Part of the reason it became so much more ornate and interesting is because its savagery had to be tamed, and it did so, I think, in very innovative, brilliant ways. But in the middle of it is the single question that my book is really trying to ask, which isn't about what we learn from football and so forth. It's, is it morally okay with each reader to consume as a form of entertainment a game that causes its players to get brain damage or that they can get brain damage? Is that morally okay for us to consume that? Because clearly we do. What the game selects for, especially at the high college and pro level, is players who suppress their empathy and can be effective in controlling their violence and expressing it. And that's what we consume. That's why you have parabolic mics on the sidelines to pick up every decibel of every bone-crunching hit. That's why we see those replays of Joe Theismann or Darryl Stingley, it was for me, or whatever the big hit is, Des Bryant. We see it over and over again. That's why you have shows like Jacked Up, because they know that we, the fans, hunger for violence, even though we give this line about, well, we just love the game's values and we love that there's such grace and athleticism. If that were all football is, great, let's do it. Let's get the chicken wings and watch the game. But if we're really honest about why we come to the game, especially men, but women as well, it is because it scratches at a tribal, violent itch that we still have.
Mark Edmondson, I want to go back to the first part of what Steve Allman said. Is it possible that if you had, instead of going out for football, encountered some really cool Edward James Olmos stand and deliver type math teacher, and got involved in the math club and started going to competitive math events, that you would have gotten everything that you got out of football?
Oh, sure. It seems to me that there are lots of ways, as Steve's accurately saying, to develop grit and develop tenacity. But for a significant segment of the population, I suspect largely male, the experience of throwing yourself into something, getting knocked down, getting back up again, and trying again has got to be very immediate and very literal. A lot of my teammates, math wasn't going to do it, history wasn't going to do it, even gymnastics weren't going to do it. It was in many ways for them football or nothing. And football worked. They are grateful to the game to this day, and I understand how they feel.
We're going to take a quick break here, come back with more Will Leach, more Mark Edmondson, more Steve Allman. So hang with us. Tweet at us at WNPR Colin. We'll be back. All right, we have been receiving some tweets here at WNPR. Colin Ben tweets, "I love football. Domestic violence didn't start or end with football. It's being scapegoated." He tweets again, "Are people asking for Chris Brown's records to be taken off of shelves because abuse? Nope." And Scott tweets, "I would be more upset with a loss than happy for a win for my team. Led me to believe I was not adding value to my life." I'm not quite sure what that means. But anyway, but it sounds profound. All right, let me just say that on the line with us, we've got Steve Allman. His new book is Against Football, One Fan's Reluctant Manifesto. In the studio connection, we've got Mark Edmondson, author of Why Football Matters, My Education in the Game. Also on the phone line, Will Leach. He's the senior writer for Sports on Earth. He hosts the daily podcast, The Will Leach Experience. He's a contributing editor to New York Magazine. You should also get the Will Leach line of sheets and towels at JCPenney. He's got 4 books out, including Are We Winning? Fathers and Sons in the New Golden Age of Baseball. Will Leach, I think a part of this is we need to talk about sort of how the story of football is told, how it has been told, and how in some ways the narrative has kind of changed a little bit. And I'm going to take you back in time. I'm not even sure whether you remember this or not, but in 2004, I think it was, which was the same year as the Janet Jackson nipple slip. ESPN had this primetime drama on called Playmakers, and it was kind of a Hill Street Blues about football, but it really kind of got into a lot of stuff that actually seems now, 10 years later, as fresh as today's headlines. There was a gay player, didn't want anybody to know it, and thought he might have to come out with his team. There was some stuff about domestic abuse by one of the players. There was stuff about performance-enhancing drugs. And in one of the things that I was really kind of shattered by, because I'd never thought about it before, ever. There was an episode in which one of the subplots was about sort of nose tackles who have to achieve a certain weight. You know, it was, if you're an NFL fan, you know that certain players on the defensive line kind of have to be, like if they're 315 pounds, that might be too small. You know, they really have to be a certain weight in order to play this position. And there was a lot of talk on this show about that and about type 2 diabetes, about the health consequences of people essentially being told that their jobs are on the line if they're not kind of huge in a certain way that might not be healthy to them. There's a lot of stuff like that. And what happened was the NFL got really mad, and they got really mad at ESPN. And the worldwide leader in sports can't afford to have the NFL really mad at it. And so the show was taken off the air, even though it was doing okay in the ratings and it was getting okay reviews and stuff like that. And so that was a moment in 2004 where the NFL could say, we're going to decide how our story is told, and it's not going to be told that way. And I feel as though over the last 10 years or so, things have shifted a little bit. You want to comment on that?
You know, I think they've shifted a little, but I do think that the fact that they were successful in getting Playmakers off the air, and you're right, it was well received, it was well rated, it was a good show, and which is not something that ESPN has always had a lot of success with when it comes to the fiction, I guess even sometimes to the nonfiction shows. But they succeeded in getting that off the air, and the reason they did, I think, speaks to one of the larger issues, which is that the main reason the NFL has become so powerful is there's been a shift in the way that the television cable industry works. As we've gone more DVR and we've all gone more in that direction, live programming, things that people cannot watch on DVR and all have to watch together as one, has become more and more valuable. If you look, if the Super Bowl was watched by more people than any other show in television history, look at the ratings for literally everything else on television has shrunk dramatically. This is an industry that's struggling, and the NFL is basically bullying in a lot of ways. And because of that, that's given it more and more power. It started with just taking Playmakers off the air. Now it's become more and more to, get ESPN's name off of the Frontline documentary about concussions. It starts to move in the direction where you see reporters involved with rights holders starting to be a little easier on the league. And I think one of the reasons that Roger Goodell and the NFL has been hit so hard by this Ray Rice situation. There's a sense that the NFL has tried to control the message about itself for so long, but I feel like they've fallen behind in the way that we consume media now. You can't do that anymore. You can't just have a certain number. It's not a matter of just controlling 5 major networks. You actually, eventually TMZ is going to get these videos out. And I feel like one of the reasons that they're coming so hard on Goodell and on the league now is because they've controlled the message for so long, and there's a sense that it's about time they pay for some of the things that they've been trying to hide about their sport for so long, and I think you're seeing that.
So, Steve Allman, at times your book seems a little bit less like against football and a little bit more like against the NFL, although you actually do at some point say that in the book and then start talking about the way this plays out at other levels of the sport. But a lot of this is really a conversation about the NFL, right? And this is a company, essentially, that operates, a business enterprise anyway, that operates in a really different way from almost any other American business enterprise, ranging it from it being inexplicably a not-for-profit to things like, even during the conversation about Michael Sam, when these unnamed general managers and other kinds of high-ranking NFL unidentified insiders would say, well, having a gay player might be kind of a distraction.
Right.
And I mean, at the time, I remember Mike Pesca saying, wow, isn't that amazing? Like, what other business in America would even feel comfortable saying that right now? Oh, I think we might find it kind of distracting to have a gay employee here at Ford.
Right. Well, or Chick-fil-A. But, I mean, look, the book, my book really does talk about the perversity of the way that the football industrial complex has infiltrated college and high school, where the mission should be education and making kids' brain activity higher, not diminishing it through a violent game. That's in there. But it's also true that the NFL is the loss leader on all of this. They are so huge, economically powerful. They're a $10 billion in revenues, or they'll probably get to $10 billion this year. And Roger Goodell, if he sticks around, rides out the storm, wants them to be a $25 billion a year industry by 2027. So that's Nike, McDonald's kind of status. So we're talking about a company that is huge, and there's economic incentives and commercialization that really filters down through the ranks. And it's played out in a zillion different ways. The reason that players are so much bigger, even at the high school level, you got high school players who are 300 pounds now, which is bigger than the pros were 20 years ago, is because there is so much emphasis on the commercial aspects of the game early on. There are high school games that are now on ESPN. So it's infiltrated, it's filtered down. But the NFL has always tried to walk this absurd line between selling violence and disavowing it. Bertie Bell, who was one of the first great commissioners of the NFL, wrote a stipulation into the TV contracts that he signed with the networks, and it prohibited them from showing injuries or fighting. And he said, in the matter of television and radio, we are doing a job for the public, a job of showing them the best football in the world, minus with any of the violence that would be too visceral redacted out of it. So this is a dance that the NFL has been doing over and over and over again. They want to bring us in with the violence, but then they want to simultaneously keep us from seeing anything that's too awful. The problem is that we now see what the actual moral costs of the game are. We see Junior Seau and Dave Durson and Mike Webster and Justin Long, and the list goes on of guys who suffered from dementia and took their own lives in those cases, or Junior Seau, or Tony Dorsett, who can't remember how to get back from his kids' sports practices, clearly has suicide on his mind, has his kids are frightened of him because he has the incipient signs of this dementia. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. Most fans choose to look away, or they use the standard rationalization. They carry around the suitcase that every fan does. At the beginning of the season, they unpack it, and the first item is, well, these guys are adults, and they choose to play the game. They get paid a lot of money to play the game. And that's not really the moral equation that I'm interested in looking at. As an ardent fan of the game, I'm asking about the moral decision to consume the game, to be a sponsor of the game. Because after all, fans built the football industrial complex. You can complain about Roger Goodell, Ray Rice, and any of these guys, but if you continue to consume the game, that's all they care about. They're a huge corporation. They have a cash register where their conscience should be, and that's not a judgment. That's just an observation. That's how it works. So the truth of the matter is, if we want to be high and mighty and choose these scapegoats, that's fine, but we can't, on the other hand, continue to subsidize the game that we're complaining about. That's just hypocritical.
Carrie Rickey, I'm thrilled that she's listening to the show, and I don't know why, but Carrie Rickey tweets, Jerry Sandusky's actions made me hate the oversight at Penn State, but not hate the Nittany Lions or college football. So, Steve, I'm going to stay with you for a second on this and just actually even kind of allow you to press me on this a little bit. So it sounds like you're saying that, I really do regard Roger Goodell as a creep. And I look at the Ray Rice thing as it's unfolded, and really you're watching a guy drag a woman unconscious unconscious out of an elevator, and you're kind of agnostic about how she became unconscious, and somehow or other you can't get that video, but TMZ can get that video. I mean, and it's like that with everything. And I was listening to Pesca interview, I think, Nate Jackson about the fact, I'd never realized this either until last week, that the NFL players, they lose their health insurance after, I think it's 5 years, you know, and so here they are with these bodies that are just racked in all the ways that you're saying, and that they should get health care for life for having played this game, but they don't. And so I don't like Roger Goodell, and I think he's a creep. But you're saying that if I sit there slicing my Wisconsin cheddar up and putting it on Triscuits, watching the Packers every Sunday and cheering and being a fan, and harboring this notion that Roger Goodell is an amoral creep, that I'm really failing to come to grips with the essential question about this game.
Well, or questions about the game. I mean, my book is basically saying, let's appreciate the beauty of the game, the intricacy, all the time, you know, all the things we spent the first 20 minutes talking about, and let's also recognize as rational adults that there are all these other aspects to it, that a huge, craven, nihilistically greedy industry has grown up around this beautiful game, and that the game itself inherently is quite violent, and we're only now, because medical research has caught up with the game, realizing how profoundly violent it is, and because the nature of the game itself is changing. When Mark was playing college, you know, when Mark was playing high school football, I would dare say that the players were not as fast and as large and as strong as they are today. And mass times acceleration equals force. And a brain essentially is a soft organ inside a hard shell. There's nothing we can do about physics or physiology. So a lot of this is just the medical research catching up with us. And it's not just a single question. You are buying into a whole set of values. I know people like to talk about Ray Rice and Roger Goodell, and I think the sports media does a good job of forcing into cul-de-sacs, little moral cul-de-sacs, the larger considerations about the morality of the game and our consumption of it. The real issue for me about Ray Rice is we are watching a game and sponsoring a game in which the gender role models are that the men are, you know, assert their dominance in the world and their effectiveness through violence, through controlled aggression, and the women are sexual ornaments who jiggle on the sidelines. That's not the gender views that most of us hold outside of the realm of football in 2014. Those aren't 1950s values or even 1850s values. Those are 1550 values. Those are Guinevere in a halter top and Lancelot in shoulder pads. The same thing is true of the attitudes around sexual orientation. The idea, the media narrative that the NFL was enlightened because it allowed a single gay employee into their workplace without, I don't know what, freaking out, is crazy. I mean, that's Chick-fil-A levels of intolerance. And, maybe the Catholic Church can get away with that, but even our military accepts that regardless of your orientation, you are, if you do your job well, you are allowed in. So I think we make all these exceptions. Obama saying that he wouldn't let his own kid play football. He's essentially saying to the rest of the mothers and fathers of America, let somebody else's kid potentially damage themselves for my entertainment. And fundamentally, as a parent and as a citizen, those aren't my values.
I'm going to just stop you there. Mark Edmondson, you're listening to Steve Allman talk, having read your book. I know that in the book you talk about the fact that you don't have an unalloyed worship of football. You really talk about it. For every good, there's a bad. For every positive, there's a real dark side to the game. Where can't you go with Steve Allman? Where among the places that Steve Allman is going right now can't you go?
Well, I'll say a line about where I'd like to go to begin with, and this may be surprising in the context of what I'd had to say so far, and that is if I had a magic wand, which I don't have, or the scepter that rules the world, I would eliminate all athletic scholarships from colleges. I would turn our institutions into institutions of higher learning, and I would allow the students to play intramural sports and local sports, and I would encourage football, nonetheless, but the coach would be paid about as much as, I don't know, a senior English professor. And we would no longer be the minor leagues to the NFL. I find a great problem in that, and gives us students who are non-students and alloys what it is we're trying to do. So there's a point of real, I suspect, concurrence. Now, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but we still do need to take some steps to separate what we're doing at universities from what's going on in professional football.
You know, Will Leitch, we're going to take a break here, but I want to get you on this too. I mean, Steve Almond is so eloquent, and pretty much what he's saying, the stuff that he's saying, seems kind of factually true for the most part. So where can't you go with him? Why doesn't everything that Steve Almond say add up to you saying, you know what, I'm just going to turn off the switch. I'm not going to do this anymore?
Well, I certainly agree with a lot of what he says, but I have to say I would love to live in a world where the values of your average NFL football game are not, in fact, the values of the majority of Americans, but I think they're closer to that than I think we'd like to admit in a lot of ways. Certainly, and I think, frankly, to speak to the other notion of college football, the college football is arguably our second biggest sport in the United States behind professional football. You can argue that it's past baseball and the NBA in a lot of ways. And, so I feel like, I'd like for us to, I feel like the average American is making the same decision about football that they're making about a lot of corporations. Like, you know what, I might not agree. I may or may not agree with what Chick-fil-A says, but the chicken's really good. And I may not necessarily agree with everything that this corporation has, but I may not like what Walmart has done to towns, but it's where I get my food. It's where I get the stuff for my home, So I feel like not everyone, as much as I would like everyone to have this constant moral conversation with themselves when they're dealing with the ramifications of what big corporations do, I don't know if everybody does, and I don't know if everybody should have to, I guess.
All right, we have to. That's provocative, but we have to take a little break. We'll come back right after this.
The racketeers make money off him, win or lose. The advertisers use him up to sell their booze. The agents and the owners and the lawyers are happy tonight, while generations of has-beens and would-be's cheer from their lazy boy recliners drinking Coors Light beer. They say he's crazy to keep going. They might be right.
I'm all in favor of changing the name of the Washington Redskins, but let's not pick another offensive or derogatory term like senators or congressmen. Today's show was produced by Betsy Kaplan and me. Greg Hill tweets for us at WNPR Colin and appeared in our intro with Patrick Scahill and Tucker Ives. The part of Bill Curry was played by Ben Jarvis Green Ellis. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff making guilt-free crispy kale chips with Bill Belichick, visit our website, WNPR.org, where Steve Metcalf's new music column kicks off today. Remember, you're invited to our 5th anniversary party on September 30th. For more information, go to WNPR.org/events. On tomorrow's show, the Nose worries about the death of breakfast cereal. And now, back to Colin.
Yes, you're going to have a very busy fall, particularly if you go to our party on September 30th, and I think it's October 17th that you'll then go to Real Art Ways to hear Steve Almond talk about his book Against Football. Also with us today, Why Football Matters author Mark Edmondson and Will Leitch from New York Magazine, Sports on Earth, and various other venues. So, Steve Almond, I'm sort of going to come back to and just sort of say, maybe build a little bit on what Will said and even maybe offer you a couple of scenarios here. So one of the scenarios is kind of to build on what Will says. There may be limits to how good we can make ourselves, Right. I mean, hip-hop has a lot of objectionable stuff in it. Video games have a lot of objectionable stuff into it. Not everybody drives a Prius. With Prius, we all have different kinds of carbon footprints. So football contains some bad in it, but few among us can really make ourselves utterly pure. So maybe that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that, for somebody like me, I work in public radio all week. I have to be a nice person, as nice as I possibly can. So on Sundays, I have this little guilty pleasure, where people hit each other and stuff like that. Do any of those kinds of defenses or arguments cut any mustard with you?
Well, they're not, yes, because they're your arguments and they're your attempt to have pleasure in your life, and that's your right. My book is about my struggle to really see the game for what it is, and what I would say is that we have to remember that football is a game. It is a form of entertainment. It is not a chip that was implanted in our necks by the overlords. It's just a form of entertainment. I know it's a huge industry, but it's one that we built because we're consuming something that allows us to unwind, and we enjoy watching it. It takes us away. It's a place of refuge. Part of the reason that I was drawn to it for so many years was that it was a refuge from the kind of moral complexity and disappointments that I encountered in the rest of my life, where I had to be a mature person who realized that everybody, even women and anybody else I might have a bias against, was equal, if not better than me, that I could not sort of march around with male prerogative and a number of other sort of complicated issues that I felt inside myself about my political involvement, my role as a citizen, as a father. All that stuff is obliterated when you're in the world of football. It's a very simple binary system. You're winner or you're loser. Either the player breaks the tackle or gets crunched, and it's wonderful to be in that space. But it's also wonderful to eat bacon. And it ends up costing you. And Americans love to eat bacon, but we don't want to look at the slaughterhouse.
Yeah, the pigs don't have such a great time either. Mark Edmondson, as you listen to this too, I mean, you put yourself into kind of an interesting position. Here you are working in academia, where probably people's antennae are kind of up about issues like this. You're the author of a book called Why Football Matters, My Education in the Game. Do you feel any discomfort with having put yourself in this role as kind of a defender of a game which, at least among a certain subset of the American population, is in kind of disfavor right now?
Yes, but ambivalence and anxiety are part of the professorial game. But what I would say is that I really appreciated the candor of Steve's description of what football had meant to him, and the key words were it's a form of entertainment, and it was a kind of refuge. Brilliantly put. I suspect that for some watchers of football, it's different. A remarkably good critic, Camille Paglia, who teaches not very far away from you, said once, "Football is my religion." And what she meant by that on some level was that the guts and the beauty that she saw on a Sunday afternoon were things that influenced her in her life. She was moved by them. She was impressed by them. She had a hard run as an academic. She had a hard run in life. But the idea that there are other people out there being brave and risking their bodies and risking their spirits was greatly moving to her and kept her moving along, doing difficult stuff in a hard situation. So all respect for somebody who's willing to come forward and say it's entertainment, it's a refuge. But I think that other people find different and deeper and more consequential things in the game. Now, we could talk at some length about whether that's worth some of the suffering that goes on the field, but it's just an alternative way of seeing it.
I would say actually that it's partly on the field and the players and what happens to their health. It's also the fact that football at this point is a legal monopoly that has nonprofit status, that goes into cities. It's corrupted the educational mission in this country. You've got a game that diminishes brain function, thriving at the high school level, and there are kids whose brain function, even if they never suffer a concussion, studies are showing us that their brain function is diminished. That's the opposite of the educational mission in this country. And there's also the fact that the power we've given the owners, and Will knows this better than anybody, gives the league their monopoly power, so much power over our public dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money are funneled directly from the public till, where they might be spent on stupid things like teachers or law enforcement or infrastructure or developing economic opportunity in economically vulnerable communities. That money goes to building giant stadiums from billionaire owners, and the public that pays for those stadiums does not sees a fraction of a percent of the profits.
I'm just going to stop you right there because we're running out of time here. I really want to get Sarah on the air here, and then we'll try to swing back here to Will for the end. Hi, Sarah. You're on the air.
Hello. I'm Sarah Shepard. I grew up in Minnesota, and my father was a football player in Georgetown, and also he played for the Chicago Bears. And I have watched football all my 83 years, I think. And I can remember when we went to a Packers game, no one else would go with him. It was so cold, and he took a sleeping bag, and he zipped me up in it and sat me in my seat, and we watched that Packer game at about 5 below zero. So I really have seen a lot of football, and I think football has changed a great deal. I think the increase in violence is unwarranted, and I don't think it's necessary. I go to Europe every year. I go to Spain because I have family there, and I watch European soccer. What a magnificent game. The tactical elements, the wonderful strategies. And I think it is a very the fans are wholeheartedly for their team. They're very excited. They're jumping up, they're yelling, exactly as they do at a football game. But there is not the violence. There is not the kind of contact sport. I was in Brazil at a soccer game. We call it football in Europe. And I was shocked to see that they had chain fences between the fans. The game was swell. It was just wonderful.
Although, and Sarah,
but the fans were rabid.
Yeah, Sarah.
So I think it's not just America. It's other places, too.
Although, Sarah, we just have to go. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you short, but we are sort of just flat out of time. I want to thank Will Leach. Read him in New York Magazine. He's got a great piece in the current issue about how every sports conversation is kind of like this conversation, full of moral anguish and outrage. Mark Edmondson and Steve Allman, thank you so much for joining us. I would say, Sarah, that if there's a bunch of people who are as big a bunch of jerks as the NFL, it might be FIFA. But there you go. Thanks very much for joining us today.
I'm Kyone Wolf. How about we keep the Washington Redskins name, but change the mascot to a potato? Huh?